Hello there, and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. This is the motion picture analyst again, trying my hand at yet another solo commentary track of me babbling for about 2 hours on this time on 1963's From Russia with Love, second in the official Eon James Bond series. This is going to be a continuing series I do of commentary tracks for the original Bond films. And again, if you've ever heard any of my other commentaries, these are all very loose, informal, nothing is prepared, and I will just basically talk through the film with various thoughts that come to mind, random bits of trivia, production notes that I've gleaned through many Bond reference materials through the years, and then just general character readings and scene readings that I personally read into, and thoughts that come to mind every time I rewatch the film. Because when I rewatch a Bond film, my head is just going at 10,000 directions at once. So I'm going to try and make this as concise and cohesive as possible, a commentary track. So do keep in mind this is completely off the cuff and not professionally recorded at all. So hopefully you can put up with my ramblings and it's informative for you as well. So be sure, and whatever version of the film you're going to sync with this commentary, and again, it's a rough sync, so it's not going to be exactly perfect because different versions have different opening logos, and there's usually a little bit of a pause when a player starts to spin up a disc, for example. And but whatever version you have, particularly if it's one of the later versions, be sure and select the original mono audio track because the remixes for the Bond films are not good at all, and particularly for the mono films, they are quite destructive. So I encourage all listeners and anyone who is a Bond fan, please, whatever you do, if possible, watch these films with their original audio tracks, particularly for these original films that were mono. So with that being said, cue your particular copy of the film up to the 0 minute, 0 second mark, and I'll do just a light sort of count in so we can try and get a rough sync going. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press play now. So here we open with the new revamped title music for the gun barrel. We're still using the original gun barrel that was spherical, so that's Bob Simmons there. This is the same one that was used on Dr. No, got reused again on Goldfinger, was not reshot until Thunderball, which was the first Bond in scope. Already musically, you can tell John Barry is here in full force. He does the entire score, and I've always loved the trail off. The early gun barrels all end with the barrel getting small, the white dots getting smaller and smaller. So this is the first of the pre-title sequence, although you can argue the killing of Strangways and Dr. No is sort of a pre-title sequence before they came up with the idea. This was something that both Terrence Young and Peter Hunt in the editing process decided would be really cool to open the film with, so they actually put it in front of the titles. Apparently it was not planned to do this, but originally this was just going to come after the main titles. Now, this stalking sequence is very much, and actually confirmed, Terrence Young himself said, this was patterned after the film Last Year at Marienbad, which is a big, art house cult favorite and was, really getting lots of critical applause and such around this time period. And I love in the official commentaries, Terrence Young thought the film was kind of pretentious, which, it is a little bit. So this scene was patterned after that, which is why you have the two going around the garden and Bond is in a tuxedo. And if you look closely at Connery's face, you know that Sean is made up to look very weird. He's got this pasty look, which of course belies the fact that this is actually not Bond. You would know coming into this for the first time that something weird is going on because his face looks a little weird, but you would still be thrown off by the fact that James Bond gets killed in the very opening. There you can see it really clearly because his eyes are a little bit of different color. That's to suggest the fact that it's a guy in a mask. Again, John Barry's music adds so much that it's right here in the first film in the series that he scored entirely. It adds so much tension that just is sorely needed in Dr. No, but isn't always there in the Monty Norman score. The first appearance of the Garant Watch, and this is when we see James Bond killed in the opening, which is something that Harry Saltzman loved. It was an idea he loved and pushed for, which is what was the impetus for this sequence. Oh, people go into a Bond film and see James Bond killed in the opening 2 minutes. And it perfectly sets up Red Grant and Spectre Island, so it serves a narrative purpose as well. And now we're getting the lovely surprise reveal that this is just a training exercise. Ironically, this was all done at Pinewood Studios. This is the actual garden outside of Pinewood itself, so they didn't have to go very far. Should be kept in mind, For Much With Love is still a low-budget film. Dr. No had been successful, so they got double the budget, but that didn't mean that they had, carte blanche to do anything. This shot was reshot with the actor here with a mustache on because Terrence Young admitted they mistakenly, shot it the first time, and the guy looked very much like Connery, so they went back and reshot it to make it more obvious. So now we're into the title sequence. This is the first time we had the pre-title into the title sequence. This was done by Robert Brownjohn, who also did the titles for Goldfinger, so it's not the Morris Binder titles. And honestly, the Brownjohn titles are sorely underrated. They both involve projecting onto the female form. Here it's the belly dancer, and I don't know if there's a more perfect representation of the mixture of eroticism and adventure that the Bond series represents than the opening titles that he did. This one in particular, I think, is one of the great cinematic title sequences, without question. And of course, it's very simple. It's just projecting onto the form, and apparently was inspired by Brownjohn's wife walking in front of a slide projector, if you've ever seen somebody do that. I've always been cracked up. They misspelled Martine Beswick's name here as Martin Beswick, of course, making she seem more like a he. The placement is kind of fun because Ted Moore's credit is sort of an in-joke because it's placed over the dancer's rear end, whereas Peter Hunt gets the really classy one on her hand. So it's a nice mixture, and it's really inventive where they put everything, because I know it must have been really difficult to get the projector lens to always focus, to get the credits clearly enough, and to change it up and make it different and keep it flowing. Now, I have to talk about Barry's instrumental here because, of course, you would think they would have used the Matt Monro title theme, but they saved that for the end credits, and I think it was a wise choice because the film needs to start with a bang right after that opening sequence, and this instrumental is so fantastic that I think it belongs in the list of the great title songs, even though it's just an instrumental. The version on the album is a little bit different. It's a different take, I believe, because it doesn't have the organ pieces. When Barry's credit rises up here, it rises with the music seeking into the James Bond theme. It's absolute perfection and builds this charge. Then you get the producer's credit, Cubby and Harry, and then right into the final one where Terrence Young's credit comes across. And once again, as I said with Dr. No, the four most important words are directed by Terrence Young. And For Much With Love really is the continuation of what they started on Dr. No. Again, it's more assured. Dr. No had come out and been successful in England, not so much in America. And For Much Love basically doubled the business, and they got a $2 million budget instead of a $1 million budget. There's a little breathing room. There's more assurance. You can tell that right here from the opening here of the chess tournament here, just with this set alone. This is a real admittance of confidence, introducing us to Kronstein. This does replicate events from Fleming's novel, but of course, as we very quickly see, the villain and of the setup of the plot is not originated by Smersh in this film. In fact, it is changed to Spectre to make the films less politically oriented and actually helps to further complicate the narrative and actually strengthen it in a lot of ways. Now, when you pull back to the master here, the ceiling was actually matted in, so the set did not extend that high. But that is so well done that you don't notice it at all, and it makes the set seem even more impressive and expensive. But what they did build with the paintings and everything is just absolutely beautiful. I should mention the production design here is not handled by Ken Adam. The big significant change was in production design. So Ken Adam was off doing Dr. Strangelove because Stanley Kubrick saw Dr. No and grabbed him for Dr. Strangelove. And so this film was designed by Sid Kane, who did a number of the Bond films, has a much more realistic and grounded style. And I think that really does suit From Russia with Love. And he's very underrated in the Bond canon. He doesn't have the mixture of futurism and the larger-than-life sets that Ken Adam could do. But that wouldn't fit from Russia with Love, and I don't think Ken Adam would have done that. So Sid Cain was absolutely perfect for this. But you can see from this set here, that doesn't stop him from making something truly iconic and memorable as this set of the Venice Chess Championship. It's also a mark of assurance that we open right into this scene, which literally has just about no dialogue. And that also helps that the opening and the pre-titles had a charge to it, because that allows you to immediately go in this because you're having to set up the plot. This is based, of course, on Fleming's novel, where the opening majority of the book is all about the setup of Smersh's plot. So you don't get to James Bond until almost halfway through the book. Whereas in the film, they move it up a little bit, but we don't get to Bond until about, roughly 15 minutes in. And they're able to condense all the events of the book, and we're able to get the plan and see them build it and get that same sort of anticipation, almost like the planning of a heist or a heist film. But already you can see how much more quickly the film is moving, and while still maintaining Fleming's plotting. Of course, Peter Hunt liked to talk about the fighting fish here. As you can see, it's one of his editing saves where he had to just cut together all these tiny little pieces because when they went to shoot it, the fish wouldn't move. And we're now to the unseen Blofeld, played by Anthony Dawson. And that's another Peter Hunt move where he took a shot and reversed it because he didn't have the shot he needed. There's a couple little things like that in this scene. I'll talk about the other one when we cut to that shot. So anyway, so it's right here. If you look behind Rosa Club, Lottie Lenya here, you'll notice that the color of the background is a bit different. That's because it's a rear projection plate, because they redid her scenes, redid some of the dialogue, and instead of dubbing in dialogue, they had to reshoot the whole thing, and so they just put her in front of her screen, which is why it doesn't quite match. So again, this is updating the book, so we no longer have Smersh being behind everything. It's Spectre playing off the British and the Russians, and then expecting to extort the Russians to return the Lektor decoding device. Of course, they had to change the name of the Lektor because in the novel it was known as the Spectre. This is before the Spectre organization was invented during the process of writing the Thunderball treatment story. So, of course, when the film goes with Spectre as the villain, they had to change the name of the decoding machine. And again, this is going through all the events of the novel that are beautifully detailed by Fleming, but obviously you can't do that in the film, otherwise this would be 3 hours long. And it sets up, but it still maintains to set up every single element that we need without having to show us everything. And that, again, starts this element of suspense that begins here with the laying out of the plan and continues to coil this spring until we get to the Orient Express. From this point onward, we get the plan laid out, and then we see it put in action piece by piece, and then we're brought to Bond, and we know more than Bond does, so already our suspense is generated, and we see him going through the layers of Kronstein's carefully planned trap that's been implemented by Rosa Club and Red Grant in Istanbul. And by the time we get to the Orient Express and then the final confrontation, that's the point the entire film builds up to. I think it's one of the most suspenseful pieces of cinematic construction that we've ever witnessed, really, and the film doesn't get enough credit for it. It often gets labeled as being Hitchcockian, and as I said in my Dr. No track, you can't get away from the Hitchcock influence on the Bond films because Hitchcock essentially birthed the spy genre in films with his earlier British films like The Man Who Knew Too Much and, of course, primarily The 39 Steps. Hitchcock was courted to be a director of the Bonds for a long time, never quite worked out, and Terence Young and Guy Hamilton even, everybody was influenced by Hitchcock, because, who really wasn't? But there is one particular sequence in For Much With Love that is directly inspired by a Hitchcock sequence, but we'll get to that towards the end of the film. But it goes much further than just being influenced by Hitchcock. This is a growth of what was started on Dr. No. And again, the increased budget, the confidence of having a successful film, and having a remarkably brilliant story to work from that was reconstructed in the cinematic medium by a phenomenal team of writers. It just adds to the strength of everything. And on top of that, you add a absolutely perfect cast, beautifully rendering what Fleming put on the page, and John Barry's score combined with Peter Hunt's editing, which is even more well-tuned and fine-tuned over what he and Terence Young developed on Dr. No. And you have what is, I think, most likely the best Bond film of the entire series, one of the greatest films ever made. And hopefully through this commentary, I can develop that idea. This is the Spectre training camp and the wonderful obstacle course setup. This was Harry Saltzman's idea, and he wanted the original pre-title sequence to be done in here, but Young fought to kept for this reveal here. The end of this sequence, it always bugged me. Peter Hunt uses an exterior master shot of them walking in, as you can see here. It's really kind of obvious when you stop and look at it, but it gives that idea of scope and scale that you wouldn't otherwise have. But he's having to reuse an alternate take from them entering. I do love that even the little details from Fleming are in here. The lovely masseuse is something right out of the novel. And here we have Red Grant for the first time, appearing very much exactly as Fleming described and perfectly physically represented by Robert Shaw, who gives one of his best performances. This is the infamous knuckle duster bit. You can see Robert Shaw's mouth. You can see him grit his teeth just a little bit, but outside of that, he gives no reaction whatsoever. And that, of course, sets him up as the remorseless, almost unstoppable seeming killer force that he will be for the rest of the film. We have this lovely leisurely transition over to Istanbul, where we are first introduced to Tatiana Romanova as the Russian cipher clerk. Of course, in Fleming's novel, she's described as a very beautiful girl, very reminiscent of Greta Garbo. They didn't really go with that in the film because they cast Daniela Bianchi, the Italian actress. And, of course, like Honey Rider and Dr. No, her performance is dubbed in the film, I believe by Barbara Jefford. I believe that was the actress's name who did the dubbing. And just like Honey and Dr. No, it is beautifully done. You wouldn't really know that she was dubbed unless you were, doing a lot of research or something. So that is something Peter Hunt did, I think, better than almost anybody else. Not only the selection of the voice performer to do all the dubbing, trying to get somebody already close to the original performer's voice, but making it just seamless. And here we have Red Grant come into the side of the frame here, one of the little subtle intrusions throughout the story, and showing that he is already a key player, even though he's not going to really fully come into play until the Orient Express. This is where Tanya is brought into the plot, of course, cooked up by Spectre. So here, Kleb appearing as having to keep up the pretense of being still a Soviet agent. And here you can see, again, Sid Kane's much more realistic design. And it's so beautifully realized that you really do buy into this being some random apartment in some Istanbul suburb, although we are still on the stages at Pinewood. And I also should mention Ted Moore's photography again, still sticking spherical. These were still not in scope at this time period. And again, his usage of color and keeping nice, clean imagery everything's in nice focus. There's not a lot of camera trickery going on. I think the first three Bonds have such a magic to their visuals because they're spherical, they're intimate, they're not big, wide scope. And again, the usage of color as well is very vivid and sticks in the mind. And here we get into the more personal part of this sequence where Kleb is digging into Tanya's back history with her romances. And in the novel, it's very much explicit that Kleb is a lesbian and kind of comes on to Tanya a little bit. In the film, they just have the light touch on the knee, so it was a way that Terence Young could convey this in action because they obviously couldn't say that there was this sort of lesbianism inherent in the scene. And I always love the line, you would not leave this room alive. And Tanya's reaction provokes just a little bit of the necessary humor, because she's immediately, I will obey your orders. So again, we're still without Bond. This is still following the structure of the novel and laying out the plan. But by this point, in just, in really just 2 scenes, we've gotten, three, I should say, if you include Spectre Island. In 3 sequences, we've gotten the whole laying out of the plan, and we can finally transition to Bond and the presentation of the problem to the British Secret Service. And so we're about 17 minutes in. So this has taken about a single reel, with a film reel being about, somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. We're back to Bond and Sylvia Trench, who was supposed to be the recurring character of the lover who always gets jilted with Bond getting called away. This was originally designed to be a recurring character like M in Moneypenny and Q, but it never came to fruition because Terence Young didn't direct Goldfinger, and the character was eventually dropped. Eunice Gayson, the actress playing Sylvia, was a friend of Terence's, and he brought her on to Dr. No. Bond having a beeper in 1963 was, pure science fiction. And here we have the one appearance of Bond's actual Bentley from the Fleming novels. Of course, here it's in green. Usually Fleming would have him in some sort of gray or silver Bentley. And this is really the first appearance of the classic Bond retort to the office and asking for more time to have a tryst with a lady friend. So they did keep that a little bit. And I love the byplay between Bond and Sylvia here. Another fun note is apparently the checked shirt that Sean has on here was actually Terence Young's shirt. He just didn't like the shirt that they had for Sean, so he just swapped shirts with him for the scene. That's one of those fun bits you get from the Criterion Laserdisc commentaries. I always love how Sylvia does claps her hands together because she's excited. She's like, "Oh yes, we get to screw some." Beautiful transition here, and it allows Peter Hunt to do a fade out when he didn't like to do them, so it gives him a way to do that. Get the hat toss from another angle. Now, there's a particular charge in doing the M and Moneypenny scenes for the second time, and I think you'd be hard pressed to say there's a better M office and Moneypenny banner scene than the scenes in From Russia with Love. I think the ones in Dr. No are excellent, but I think they achieved the right balance the second go around, and then from this point onward, it was trying to find a way to keep it fresh because they'd already done it twice now. Now, as I said in the previous commentary, if you look at the walls, these were still faking a wood-paneled office. They had more money, but they just reused the set from Dr. No. It wasn't until Ken Adam redid the set for Goldfinger that they actually switched over to real wood, which is why all of a sudden M's office is much darker and the lighting is totally different. Here, it's still very open, very similar, actually almost identical to how it is in Dr. No, but it's a bit more composed, a bit more polished, and again, I think that notion goes to the film overall. The whole film is more polished than Dr. No. You have more elements of the formula that were being developed and hammered out, but it's still a hard-hitting suspense film, a spy thriller, and very much driven by the Fleming original novel. I've always loved Bond's reaction here, the way Sean plays this and then freezes when he actually looks at Tanya's photograph and focuses on it. And there's an element of humor here that Bond and M play, and you really get the paternal relationship that M and Bond have from the Fleming novels. And here, I think it's at its most fulfilled. Dr. No, you get a little bit with the Bond trying to sneak out the Beretta, but here, what if I don't come up to expectations? Just see that you do. And it's also talking about and explaining to the audience that MI6 being British, they see this, even though they know it's a trap, they see it as a challenge, and that's why they're going to spring the trap. So there's an element of old school adventure to it. And here is Desmond Llewellyn's first appearance as the legendary Q, demonstrating the attaché case, which is in Fleming's novel, but it's expanded in the film, and this becomes the first of the gadgets. But unlike the DB5 and Goldfinger, everything here is within the realms of items that had already been used throughout the Cold War and World War II and spying. None of it is too overdone. None of it is too fantastic, which is key. And every single piece is intricate and fully woven into the film's plot. So nothing is extraneous, which is really important. And as Guy Hamilton talked about, Cubby Broccoli always insisted that everything should be shown to build suspense. And this is why we get the demonstration of the tear gas cartridge, because from this point onward, we know this is going to be deployed at some point. We just don't know when. So we, as the audience, are primed for the gadgets to be used. And so we're always waiting for that moment. This demonstrates how to open the case properly, so we know when it is finally used in the Orient Express that Red Grant will obviously not have Q's briefing. Peter Hunt liked to talk about this was his favorite gag on the film, where he was cutting the dailies and he cut in the explosion of Dr. No when Bond opens the case here. So opens the case, explosion, and then he put the end credits on and cracked Terrence Young up, and then they ran it for everybody just to freak him out. And it's that sort of jovial atmosphere that I think you feel in this film. You really do. They have the confidence of having a successful film, and now they've all come back. Connery's line, quoting Shakespeare, is probably my favorite Connery line in all of Bond, and this is the best Bond Moneypenny sequence without question. Where the moonlight on the Bosphorus is irresistible. How did you get you to take me there sometime? I've tried everything else. Darling Moneypenny, you know, I never look at another woman. Let me tell you the secret of the world. And the way that Sean gets right, they touch heads, and he leans around to like kiss her ear just a little bit. It's the perfect level of intimacy and playfulness, and then it's cut by M's intercom. And the cap here is the writing on the photograph, which apparently that's actually Terrence Young's hand doing the writing. And when From Russia comes up, Bond thinks about it, adds that, and Barry's score is starting to lay in, which is the James Bond with bongos. This is the transition to Istanbul, and Bond says ciao as the proper Bond should. That's his preferred method of saying goodbye. And the final note is that Moneypenny responds with the exact same. Now, arriving on Pan Am to the Istanbul airport, this is mirroring the same sequence in Dr. No, but the difference here is we're going into the enemy territory, because this is the middle of the Cold War, and this is ostensibly a Russian-held territory. This is the film's famous identification sequence for MI6 agents, and those of us who are diehard Bond fans have probably used this in everyday life many, many, many times, took a few looks. Now we're introduced to the Bulgar agent working for the Russians, and outside we're introduced to Red Grant in a car. This is very similar to seeing Jack Lord's Felix Leiter and then Quarrel outside in the car in Dr. No, but this time the flip is that we're seeing both the agents of the opposition. We see the Russian agent first, and he gets into a car to follow, and then Grant takes off. Grant, being the outsider, is the Spectre agent, so he's like the sort of angel of death, watching over everything to ensure that the plan that Kronstein cooked up doesn't go off the course they've set everyone on. And you'll notice that characters like that, particularly Red Grant, are continually introduced over and over to keep the overall plot idea in the audience's mind. And it's scenes like this where Bond is noticing the tale, that, you know, you have the actual elements of Spycraft coming in, the danger, and this is highlighted by Barry's rendition of the Bond theme with a nice flavor of Istanbul, even though, you know, it doesn't have anything particularly Turkish about it. And of course, Kerim Bey's son immediately puts Bond at ease with the knowledge and already setting up that Bond is on the enemy's turf, and as Kerim Bey says in just a moment, the game here with the Russians is played a little differently. Here we get more of the travelogue aspect of the Bonds, which is something that people don't think about as much. Bond actually going through a market in Istanbul in 1963, you know, it's definitely another world for, you know, people seeing this in the States or in England at the time. And to set up that Kerim Bey is definitely not exactly the same as M, his lady friend for the afternoon is already leaving. Of course, she's played by Nadia Regin, who shows up again in the Goldfinger pre-title sequence. And here we have Pedro Almendarez in his final film role as Kerim Bey in perhaps one of the greatest literature to film embodiments of a character you'll ever see in your life. Armendariz in this film is so astonishing. He is without question the single greatest supporting performer in the entire Bond series forever, without question. And the way that he and Sean are able to play off each other just add an energy to these scenes that leave you grinning like an idiot. Armendariz, of course, had been in many, many films, both in Mexico and Hollywood, and had done a number of films with John Ford, which is really how Terrence Young knew him, Terrence Young being a friend of Ford's. And nobody knew that Armendariz was terminally ill with cancer when he signed on for this film. And seeing this film, you would not know that at all, but they did have to shoot around him and try to get him done quickly so that he could try and seek medical treatment. And for the whole film, he was, basically having to take intense amounts of painkillers just to make it through. And so a lot of the long shots, Terrence Young was forced to use doubles. Sometimes he doubled them himself, but they redid the schedule so they wouldn't have to replace him, because Armendariz begged Young and the production to not replace him. He wanted to have a final film to leave some money for his family. And knowing all that just adds such an intense emotional connotation to the entire performance, because Kerim Bey is so full of life. Now, if you look closely at the poor Russian fellow that's bound and gagged there, that's actually stunt coordinator Bob Simmons, who pops up as a lot of the opposition in the early Bond films. Now, Bond checking into the Istanbul hotel, there's a lot more detail in this in Fleming's novel, but of course the film is trying to move along in a nice clip, and Peter Hunt has laid in the original James Bond theme, something that he was very happy to do because he loved the theme so much and he could just lay it in. This is a nice wipe transition, mimicking the elevator. That's one of the first wipes Peter Hunt uses in the Bond series, and he later uses them extensively on Thunderball. Bond will be able to search his room again, highlighting that this film is about spies and spycraft, even though it is a fantastic thriller. We're still in the Terrence Young set world of Dr. No. This mimics what we see in Dr. No of Bond setting his room with all the various traps, the hair across the closet door, the leaving of talcum powder on his briefcase. But here he's looking for listening devices because obviously he is in enemy territory and he is in this insidious plot that is obviously designed to trap MI6, and they are springing the trap. Very cleverly, the highlight of the theme comes when Bond finds the listening device. So I know some people have wondered why the theme is here, but it serves its purpose, and Connery's look when he backs away, it's similar to the look he has in Dr. No when he's obviously going to go and kill Mr. Jones when he's on the phone with Government House. It's very similar. And also, something I should mention, Bond hesitates before he throws the hat on the bed, because that's ostensibly a sign of bad luck, but he just says, nah, screw it, and does it anyway, which is the exact same methodology that Bond has for springing this, what he thinks is a Russian plot. And that influences every action of Bond up until the reveal of Spectre being behind everything, that Bond is, in a strange way, enjoying springing the trap. He's playing the role he's supposed to play, even though he and MI6 know what the score is, as it were. And if you pay attention there to the voice of the hotel receptionist, it has been dubbed by Monica Vanderzil. So if you ever wondered why Honey Rider's voice is the voice of the girl at the hotel desk, well, they just used the same voice actress. I love a little pop there. That's the hanging up of the second receiver, so Bond knows that obviously that there were others listening in. We sort of cross-cut back and forth with these little exchanges where Grant is keeping the Spectre plan of Kronstein moving. This allows us to continue along with the main plot of the story, and this furthers the tension and danger, because here, by dropping off the dead Bulgar outside the Russian agency, the consulate, Now, this makes the Russians think that it's the British, which leads to the limpet mine being planted on Kerim Bey's office wall, and that furthers the tensions, which then make the British think that the Russians are out to get them because they're there for stealing the Lektor away. So it just furthers the tensions and causes both sides to not question anything that's going on and follow Kronstein's plan. Now, as I talked about in Dr. No, I think the Terence Young films are the only 3 films that are fully sensualized in the Bond series. And you get it right here with Kerim Bey's mistress here, so longing for him to come and have some fun times with her instead of working. And the way that she's thrown herself on this makeshift bed of sorts and is just sort of cavorting there, softly calling his name, and then gets this sort of smile, especially when she stands up here. We see her smooth her dress out, but you don't see her face or anything. There's something extraordinarily sensual about moments like this, and it's only in the Terence Young films that you get that. So if you want to talk about a quotient of sexiness, it's I think most felt in these moments of real raw sensuality. And again, you only get that in Dr. No, For Much With Love, and Thunderball. This is woven into the plot because Kerim going over saves his life, and his line there, "Back to the salt mines," is one of my favorite lines from the film. I use that all the time. I always love when the flash goes off that Tedmore uses a purple to really give you this vivid sense of explosion, even though it's all off screen. There's just a little camera shake. There's a fade there. There are a couple fades in both Dr. No and From Russia with Love, but after Peter Hunt was very not fond of using them. But it does give you a good passage of time. I've also always loved how Bond and Kerim are always very similarly dressed. They're almost always in gray suits. Connery's tailoring here is also like Dr. No, but just like everything else in the film, just like Connery's performance, it's a bit more refined. And it really, I think, is the iconic look for Bond in the film series. And again, when you look at their faces, the way they play off each other, there's this undercurrent of humor, and you can tell Sean, like everybody else, absolutely adores this man, just as Bond adores Kerim, which adds such a weight to Kerim being the sacrificial lamb of both the book and the film. And his death is the most deeply felt of all of the sacrificial lambs, of course, excepting Tracy and Our Majesty's Secret Service. Here we're on the real location of the underground cisterns in Istanbul. And you read the passages in the novel, and it's amazing being able to see them for real in the film. And again, you do have a sort of time capsule aspect to the film, being as if you were walking around in 1963 Istanbul, as in Dr. No, it's like walking around in 1962 Jamaica. It's also interesting to note this entire sequence is silent, so John Barry is already demonstrating that he knows when to score scenes and when not to score scenes. This was still a relatively early score for him. He had scored a handful of films before doing From Russia with Love, but it was a major coup for him to get From Russia with Love, and he really approaches it with great gusto. This is one of the most fantastic scenes in the entire series. It's the perfect blend of the fantastic and the real. It's not fantasy, but it's just plausible enough that Kerim Bey could have had a periscope from a submarine installed underneath the Russian consulate. It's just fantastic enough. It could be fine that you might selling rugs of wool. It's hard to quote when you're trying to comment at the same time, so I have to try and fight the quoting urge. So, of course, this sequence is really heightened in suspense because Kerim was able to get the periscope in there, but he couldn't get listening devices in there. In the novel, it's furthered that this is disguised as a sort of mouse hole, and that one day they've gotten exterminators in there before and put mouse traps in there. Again, not having sound really heightens all of this. And also the fact that there's no music going. And the music only comes in when Krylenko is revealed, which is furthering the narrative. And it's the right little musical sting. And it's also not very high in the mix. It's very faint. So that's another mark of how well mixed the first Bond films were. Even though they were low budgeted films, the actual sound mix, both the music and of course the fantastic effects supervised by Norman Wanstall, are just brilliantly put together. Peter Hunt also had a lot to do with the overall design of the sound mixes as well, being the editor. Also, Hunt talked about how Danielle Bianchi had a particular gait in her walking. So this is actually not her. This is another actress or model. So that's the first time Bond sees Tanya, he's actually seeing somebody else. It's also very much like I said before with Kerim's Mistress, this image of seeing part of a female form without seeing the face and stuff. There's something very voyeuristic about it, something very sensual, which is something I've always found interesting. It also, the film's pacing, it has a charge to it, but it's very natural. So here we transitioned over to the Gypsy camp, but it's not, bang, 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 and it's not also, super slow and 3 hours long. It's this perfect rhythm established and maintained throughout. And by doing this, like I said before, the whole film is like a coil that's being continuously, pressed downward, and that's that level of suspense. And you do get expansion of that here in the Gypsy sequence, because from this moment here, Bond and Kerim go in there. Kerim talks about the roles being driven by two dummies, being a great decoy. But as soon as they pull into the Gypsy camp, we see, again, some characters on the fringe. We know their opposition because now they call Krylenko, and they're all dressed in black. So already we're getting a double dose of suspense here because the whole Gypsy camp is now a setup, and we know basically this small army is coming in to attack them. So it adds a charge to the whole sequence, which by the time of the girl fight, you actually start to forget about, and then it erupts, and you're like, oh! And this sets up the scenes from Fleming's novel. They had a lot of trouble with the censors doing the girl fight, but it's a remarkable atmosphere setup, and done completely on the stages at Pinewood. They were just going to do it on location, but they weren't able to. So this is a remarkable set. And the costumes, the lighting, the music, everything just makes it one of the most vivid examples of another culture in any Bond film. Here we are introduced to the dancer Layla, who is just iconic and remarkable, and the music here is really stunning, and it feels so vivid. I know in John Burlingame's Music of James Bond book, there's discussion that maybe this wasn't composed by Barry and that it was a source piece, but it's just absolutely stunning. And my favorite moments of this sequence, you see everybody reacting and smiling, and eventually Connery is just grinning, and he's totally in the moment. You can see the smile on his face. It's just a nice interlude, and complete local color, if you will. And you have that sensuality of her being a belly dancer, and it's a certain thing that definitely audiences of 1963 would still find otherworldly. There's the shot where Sean is just totally cracking up, and it's that moment of being fully in the moment that then makes scenes like this, where Krylenko kills the guard with a knife in the back because he's been distracted by the belly dancer. And all this is done very quiet, very slow. So again, we're starting to ramp up the tension a bit. And eventually this will be added to when Red Grant shows up, again being right here, introduced on the edge of the frame. Terence Young does this a lot throughout the film, and it adds a layer of suspense and adds a layer of otherworldliness, that always accentuating the idea that there's an outside influence, and that, of course, is Spectre. My favorite moment of the sequence is when Lila comes over in front of Sean and bends over backwards and waves her arms and perfectly frames his face, and then his face starts to track her, and they almost come nose to nose. It's right here. It's just a beautiful moment. And really, this is something that's been lost over the years, and another element of the initial films they need to get back to. And Bond always maintains the cool, the suave factor, even though he's obviously having a ball with Kerim. Now we're introduced to the Gypsy fighting girls. One, of course, played by Martine Beswick, who became very friendly with Terrence Young. She had auditioned for Dr. No, didn't get it. He worked her into Russia and then got her the part of Paula in Thunderball when she had more acting experience. You look very closely there at that on the other shot. You can tell it's a stand-in for Kerim. So there are a few moments where you can tell. And Terrence said that in some of the commentaries that they finished their shots with Pedro here on the Gypsy camp sequence, and as soon as they finished the last shot, it started storming, and it stormed for about 5 days. So it was almost like a sign. Again, Barry's score. It starts strong, but it allows silence to creep in, and it builds with little bits of bombast and strings. So every single moment is heightened, and then by this point, it starts a particular rhythm that's like a heartbeat. So it's trying to match almost the pounding of the blood in their heads as they're just trying to literally murder each other. The censors were all over this sequence because they were insistent on making sure no flesh was visible, nothing came out of the torn clothes. Of course, they also read into this being possibly sexualized in some way, but with it being two people literally trying to fight to the death, I don't think that's really there. And I love that everything is started on the moment that she picks out the bottle to crown the other over the head. This is the first appearance of John Barry's 007 theme, which is one of the great adventure themes. Barry goes full out to create an old-fashioned adventure film theme here, and he goes big, and it is such a shame that this theme has not been accepted as classic as it is, and it hasn't been used since Moonraker. The key to this whole sequence is Bond goes around, instead of just fighting. Oh, you gotta love the moment where Pedro rubs his own blood in his arm. But anyway, Bond goes around and fights with his brain. He assists all of the Gypsy fighters, but he reacts and he acts in distinctive, thought-out moves that assists everyone. Like he cuts the line to send the burning caravan in. He karate chops a guy in the neck. He uses the Walther to knock out one of Krylenko's men. He shoots with accuracy. He reacts and manages to become a sort of army in and of himself. Red Grant is introduced here, which sets up the moment where he will kill the Bulgar about to stab Bond in the back, which, of course, they can't have that because even if it didn't kill Bond, it would put him out of commission, which would ruin Spectre's plan, which is why Grant later reveals, saved your life at the Gypsy camp. I love that. Well, that, of course, sets up Bond as being the favored son. And of course, Grant lies in wait at the perfect vantage point, almost like a sniper. And here's the moment. And Bond turns around confused. And then eventually has to give up, trying to figure out. And he's like, well, that was great. This is also probably the birth of the Connery classic pose with one hand kind of out and the sort of position with the Walther. Of course, the Gypsy camp sequence became sort of a template for action sequences in Bond films. It was basically redone underwater for the finale of Thunderball, and a number of further times became the template for the big set-piece action sequences of You Only Live Twice, Spy Who Loved Me, and of course done in space in Moonraker. Talk about the lived-in atmosphere here. Bond creates a sling, an improvised sling for Kerim Bey's wounded arm, and their suits are covered in dust and blood. These films are still in the real world. They're still vivid. but we're allowed a nice sort of breather of humor because here Bond is made his son, and Bond asked for the girl fight to be stopped, which sets up the lovely little interlude where they spend the night, and Bond is allowed to decide himself who will marry the chief's son. And the humor here, it's not in the throwaway lines, although there are some nice throwaway lines here. It's in the playing of the scene. Barbara will let you decide the matter. And I've always loved Barry's cue here. It's the perfect blend of atmosphere and the passage of time. And of course now the girls are completely dolled up to look as appealing as possible. And again, the joy, the humor is in the performances. And again, this, while in most films this would be a bit of a drag, it would be like in a Western, the people sitting around a campfire. With the editing and the music score, it keeps the same established rhythm, although there's no action or anything going on. It's breathing room, and I love the moment where Martine bites she's sewing his button on and bites off the thread with her teeth. And of course, the other calls after Bond, and it's like, well, now that they've been with him, I don't think they really care about the chief's son anymore, do they? And we're right back into the serious world of Spycraft as soon as Bond asks, "Did you pick up the package for me at the hotel?" It's on the seat. Now, this is a great moment of self-advertising. Of course, the poster in the original novel is of Marilyn Monroe, and it was for the film Niagara, which is one of her best starring vehicles. But of course, that was in the 1950s. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman produced one other non-Bond film in the 1960s, and that was the Bob Hope, Anita Ekberg comedy Call Me Buana, which was made between Dr. No and From Russia with Love. So they make a poster with Anita Ekberg's face, and that's what you see here in the film. So it's great cross-promotion, but of course now that's pretty much lost on everybody watching the film. Of course, they couldn't have done Marilyn Monroe and Niagara because, of course, they had to update it for 1963. And again, the level of suspense throughout this film, because here we have it right here where they cross over to the shadows because they hear someone coming. Of course, it's Kerim's sons dressed as officers, but the lowering of the suspense is held to the last moment. And it's finally when Kerim comes out of the shadows that we know it's all right. Again, there's such a confidence throughout For Much With Love that it just expands on everything that was in Dr. No. I've always adored that the rest for the AR-7 is another man's shoulder. And then Kerim has to kill him and demands that he has to do it. This adds to the suspense even further because Kerim is shooting with a wounded arm and he's only got one shot, as Bond points out. So Kerim is motivated by revenge. He has a wounded arm and he only has one shot. So it has to count. And he can't wait too long, and it's drawn out to the very last second. And right there, the music starts to fade out very beautifully. Fall happens, music's gone. And now we get the best one-liner. That's the relief of tension perfected. And now we can cut back to the hotel room and a great moment of badassery. This is one of the key moments of Bondom, and that's why they use the meeting of Tanya for testing all new actors. They've done it since the beginning of the series, really, whenever they consider new actors. But just as key is the beginning here, where Bond orders his room service for the morning. It's very lived in. It's very dark. He takes off the classic holster. Breakfast one at 9, please. Green figs, yogurt, coffee, very black. Thank you. You can't tell I memorized that as a kid. Of course, that is actually right out of the novel. And here, Bond's senses are alerted because he first smells perfume. So that's something that already is cueing in his senses that something is amiss. And that's something that most people wouldn't notice. Now, one of the things people like to talk about, Bond turns on the bath here and never turns it off. But if you notice, the only thing that comes out is steam. There's no water, which I assume is because they didn't have running water into the set, but Bond never turns it off. So that is one of those sort of goofs that for some reason, everybody seems to notice that. But of course, Bond leaves it on because if he turned it off, then if it was an enemy agent, they would know that Bond heard them and was coming for them. So that's why he leaves it on. It's a moment of intelligence work, really, of a proper response to then try and get the drop on them, which is why he comes around the side and then goes out onto the sort of patio area, comes around from the side. We get this wonderfully risque shot of Tanya getting to the bed naked, and it's just showing a tiny bit of what you think you see, and then we cut back over and we hear the sound of the sheet first and see her in there. You see the overturned chair, and that was the noise that Bond heard. She was trying to undress in the dark. I love how Bond comes in with just a towel, but he's got the PPK in hand, so there's always the element of, this is not a guy to be trifled with. Already, there's such a steaminess and sensuality here. And then the play with the gun, which Bond will eventually put under the pillow there. And now Tanya's having to play the part that she's been given, and Bond's having to play the part that he's been given, but they're playing against what they've been given. Of course, the mouth joke has been read as being overtly sexual, but, But the way that this scene is played, the way that the dialogue is read out very close as in between actual kisses is such a heightened sensuality. Again, I know I harp on about it a lot, but you only get this in the Terrence Young films. And I think if anybody else had directed this scene, it would not have the same critical sensuality. This is the key sexual moment of the entire series because the whole film revolves around it. Bond is essentially having to pimp himself for England as the plot is making out. Now the scar comes back because that is used as a way that Tanya is talking about knowing everything about Bond from his file. And the whole scene is capped off. I will tell you if you came up to my expectations in the morning with the perfect level of intonation. And Barry's score, right here, when the hands come down, you hear the piano starting to trail off. It adds such a darkness. And this is fulfilled by the trick mirror and all of this being filmed for Spectre. The censors had a lot of trouble with that in the UK at first, but they had to do it just right to sort of undercut the steaminess of that scene. Here's everybody's favorite Bulgar agent tailing Tanya around. Tanya is trying to make sure she's not being tailed as much as possible so she can try and slip the plans of the consulate to Bond and the Saint Sophia Mosque. This is the real Saint Sophia Mosque, which you can still obviously go to, and this is a real tour group going around. So that's the tour guide giving you the tour. So you get basically a little bit of the tour of the mosque in the film as a free bonus. Bond breaks away from the tour group and has very stylish 60s shades on, which look awesome, of course. It's one of the few times you see Bond in sunglasses, actually. But it's that and the camera. It's a little bit of accoutrements to pass himself off as a tourist wandering around. And then the little bit of business here where he signals to Tanya by just doing... He closes the sunglasses and just uses them ever so slightly to point over. We are in on that, but somebody else would just see him as moving his hand. So again, The notion of spycraft is always here, and I don't think it's ever more prevalent than in From Russia with Love. Again, beautiful location photography. Not easy to do in a historical site, with a real tour group going around. You obviously can't put a whole lot of lights in there, so you have to use what was naturally available. And also, film stocks, especially the 1960s, were definitely a lot slower than what we have today. Barry's cue being really dramatic because it comes in exactly at the moment where Tanya lays down the compact, which Peter Hunt had a lot to do with the actual cue editing. I know sometimes he would drive John Barry crazy with what he would do with some of the cues, but Barry would also study the scripts and try to get the timing exactly right. And that is really critical to the effectiveness of a score. As soon as he picks it up, he's killed in 3 swift blows by Grant. And there's a great moment of suspense here where Bond is starting to peer around. Grant starts to walk away, of course, with the killer black gloves on, but then he takes a second to peer back around. His face comes back into the light. Bond starts to come over, and that's when he walks away. So it's a layer of suspense because we're almost like, oh my God, Bond's going to see you. Bond's going to see you. The plan's going to be ruined. So it's an extra little beat that just makes the whole sequence even more suspenseful. And there's always something really dramatic about prying something out of someone's dead hand because, that's what they were clutching on. That is the matching edit from the small map to the big map, Kerim folding it away, is one of my favorite Peter Hunt edits. It's a brilliant transitional edit, something that he would really elevate even further on Thunderball. Bond just concludes, and he's already questioning, well, who could have killed him? And they can't figure it out. Well, let's just say Istanbul's a rough town. But already, his brain, his sixth sense, if you will, and in Kerim as well, saying something is off here. But they're like, no, well, it's just the Russians. Well, somebody must have killed him. I don't know. The Lektor's the important thing. But it's all these little moments throughout the story that are signaling something is off, which, again, is in Fleming's novel, but Bond isn't an idiot, and so he and Kerim know that something is not quite right, but the way that their hands are being forced by Spectre's machinations are, keeping them from questioning too much, and we see that, and that furthers the suspense because you're sitting there screaming, no, 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 there's more going on. And here Bond admits that, yes, he is dangling, but he just wants the Lektor. And so he knows he's putting himself in mortal danger, and that's the challenge. It's the thrill of the hunt. That's what the whole thing is. And Bond himself lives for the dangerous assignments, because otherwise he'd be sitting in his office on Monday, as Fleming loved to write about, especially the opening of Moonraker, the Moonraker novel. And it's moments like this that Bond lives for, the element of danger. That's just the thing that keeps him alive, as they would allude to in GoldenEye. This is the covert meeting between Bond and Tanya on the little ferry, and this is where Bond will be able to grill Tanya about the Lektor and record her in the, probably derived from Q Branch, the camera with the tape recorder, which is a neat little gadget and pure spycraft and totally based on things that really existed in the Cold War. And of course, they're having to do it in public, so Tanya's freaked out. And so again, as she says, it's a danger. So again, every moment has danger, completely inherent. And this could be, a completely boring scene because it's just a dialogue scene. But, the way that it's set up first, they move around a bit, they talk about, they can't be observed, and they're having to be duplicitous about it. And plus you get a lovely, beautiful backdrop of Istanbul. And this could be a bunch of technobabble, but the way that it's written, staged, and directed, there is a wonderful sexual energy to it and charge, because of course by this point they've already been lovers, and so throughout the tape we have references, and Tanya's, like, will you make love to me in England? Day and night, go on about the mechanism. It's Bond undercutting all this to get the information out, and of course this is going to get played back in M's office, as we'll see, so it's doubly funny because of all of that. So again, if it was completely technical, it would be completely boring. but you have the element of danger, but they can't help talking about the events of the night before. It also should be mentioned, I should talk for a second about the writing of this film. Of course, the film is based on Fleming's novel. It adheres strictly to Fleming's novel. Originally, Lynn Dayton, the great writer, was brought in to develop the script, and other writers passed in and out after that point, but then it was primarily handled by Richard Maybaum, and Maybaum himself felt Russia was the strongest of the Bond films, and found a perfect balance of sticking very closely to Fleming's text, having realism, but having a perfect dry wit and the humor being fully sardonic and not going too heavy into the gadgets and not being too heavy into the fantasy, and being the perfect balance of all the distinct elements. And I think he's exactly right, and I think that's why From Russia with Love is the best of the series. Now, the line there where Bond admits, once when I was with him in Tokyo, we had a really interesting experience. Of course, that alludes to Bond being in Tokyo before, whereas You Only Live Twice, he says he's never been to Japan before. So it must have been a really classified trip with him. We have the return of M interrupting Moneypenny with the intercom, and a beautiful transition where M dictating the telegram transitions into Bond finishing it. So that is exactly like the moment where we had the map transition earlier. And Bond talking about dates with Kerim sets up that, they're going to tell Tanya, we're going to go on the 14th. So it's not quite as explicit here that this is the 13th. It's revealed later in dialogue when Tanya reacts to Bond bursting in. So that's a nice little bit of trickery where they do that one little change to throw off any Russian controls because they still think it's a Russian plot. This is a great moment. We have a reprise of the Barry Barry theme from Bond ordering his room service earlier. The guy at the desk is so stony as he talks about the perfection of the Russian clock. Always correct. I like how we have various figures of Russian history just on the walls. You feel like this would be a very not fun waiting room to sit in for hours. And Bond just has a gas mask under his coat. And best of all, the clock itself, when the explosion goes off, the clock itself descends on a little cord, so it's just flapping there. I've always loved that little bit. I don't know if you're supposed to notice that, but that was always what my eyes went to. Now the 007 theme comes back, but it's sped up now. It's a very, very rapid pace as Bond breaks in through the tear gas, straps on the gas mask, which of course, him moving against all the traffic shows that he's the the invader, so that's why the guard shoots at him. And here's the bit where Tanya says, but, I thought it was going to be tomorrow. And Bond said, hell of a time to be superstitious. But it's also Spycraft because it's, even if this is a plot, it would be better if they would, try and offset the other side as much as possible. So that's why they sprung the trap a day early. That way they could get out because, that is under the suspicion, well, maybe this is a setup to catch us inside the consulate. And it's also a shame because in doing this, Kerim will have to come up with something different because they might find the periscope and they'll probably move or something. That's stated in the novel. Something else in the novel that Fleming was really happy they got in was the shot of the rats here in the tunnel. That was something you couldn't get in films, and they couldn't shoot in the UK. They finally had to wind up going to Spain to get that shot. It's very brief, but it's perfect atmosphere, and Fleming wrote vividly about the tunnel of rats, so he was so happy they worked in the rats into the film. I've always felt this was so dramatic here, their final escape, when the 007 theme really kicks in with the horns as they climb the steps. And it's capped off by the beautiful moment where they come up in the little trap door in the back of the shop here. There's something so beautiful about that. It's just a tiny little hatch hidden away. And then you hear the sirens going towards the consulate. You see the massive crowds, which the production had a lot of trouble in shooting the film and keeping the crowds away. So for scenes like this, they actually staged things like they had a stuntman hanging off a building across the street. There's a great little moment here. Sean jumps over some luggage. He jumps over the little cart there. So you're definitely in the moment as they're getting to the Orient Express at the last minute, right as it takes off, because it's timed. They've timed it just barely. But of course, not enough time to avoid seeing the Russian security man, Benz, who covers the stations. Now, apparently, somewhere here in the windows hanging out, you actually would notice there's Harry Saltzman's wife, Jacqueline. I think she's supposed to be the woman in the red, but I'm not for certain. She was supposed to do a number of cameos, but that sort of died out after this point. And we're introduced to Grant again, and he just closes the window. Notice he's the only person on the train that does, which, again, he's nefarious. But we get the nice little musical sting, and we know he is on the train. So Spectre is still watching, and now we're going out of Istanbul, but the Angel of Death, Red Grant, is on the train. We get Bond and Tanya's cover as the Somersets, and the setup with their passports, and will be later finalized with the wedding ring. If you notice, Bond's suit still covered in dust from going through the blown-out consulate. That's a nice touch of continuity. And I love how Tanya is saying Somerset over and over and over. She loves the idea of playing the married Englishwoman. It's a nice little bit of character there. You miss it a lot. But she sits there and she's saying Somerset, Somerset, Somerset. And here Bond and Kerim are talking about the escape route that Kerim has set up. And, of course, they're doing this outside because they still don't know Tanya's real allegiance. And, of course, they have to do this outside, so they stop as the woman passes through. We get the shot of her walking down because she could be an enemy. She could be an agent of the opposition. And now we pick up the conversation again. And Bond has his code set up with Tanya already with the knocking 3 times. And here she's so relieved because she thinks, oh, we've made it to the train, that's it. And, of course, that's not it. And this is a great moment of romance. Bond hands her trousseau, and she says he has nothing to wear. That's a joke, but then the romance comes in, where Bond has the entire wardrobe prepared. I love the way Sean does his hands. That's sort of reminiscent back to the no hands line in Dr. No. But it's played with the right balance of humor, and I think that's something that Sean and Terrence put in there. And Barry's score has that slight, almost like music box quality. Again, the level of romance here really heightens the entire relationship because, of course, what are they going to do on the train but have fun with one another. And we get the fun of the fashion show of her wearing these gorgeous outfits. A little bit of byplay back and forth as they kill the time. But right back to the suspense where Benz is now outside. So he's figured out which room they're in, and Kerim has observed this. So that's, we had a slight breather there, but right back. And there's an intimacy, where she's painted her nails and Kerim knocks on the door and Bond says, "You're next. You're closest." And now they have to go talk more business because Kerim's going to talk about Benz, so they're going to go to the restaurant car to appear normal, but again, they still can't talk in front of Tanya. Daniela has such a wonderful inocuance as Tanya that I think really, really helps. And again, their byplay is so amazing between Bond and Kerim. Kerim's going to decide he's going to keep Ben's company, and Bond goes along to back him up and leads to the fun scene here where they pose as the conductor, because otherwise Benz wouldn't open the door, because he obviously didn't have time to buy a ticket, so he pulls out a wad of cash. And then, very much like a Dr. No, Walther PPK introduction. And then we pull back just a little bit. And it's a nice humorous bit where Benz is frozen and caught. Then he gets gagged and tied up with his own tailoring. It's a nice comical effect when he just stares at Bond with these hateful eyes, and he's just gagged with his own handkerchief. And this is capped off by Kerim saying, "Would you like to hear my life story?" You would. It's a nice bit of humor. Bond goes away, glances for a second, sees this figure, moves on. The figure gets away, pulls back, and it's Red Grant. And he has the black leather death gloves on. So you know immediately that Kerim and Benz are both dead. This is one of the great little bits of the series when Tanya does the little hair mustache thing. I don't know why, but it's just a beautiful little moment. And again, there's such a sensuality in these scenes that just leaps off the screen. And that's heightened here. She goes right off camera. She's starting to pull the strap down. She goes right off camera range. Again, you don't see a darn thing, and you don't need to. And of course, they obviously, have another moment of passion, and we cut to the train. So it's another nice cutaway. And of course, she's now smoking, and Bond is just in his shirt. This, of course, is where Bond and Kerim planned to get off, and this is where originally they were going to get off. So apparently, Bond would just grab the Lektor and Tanya and jump off the train and leave all the stuff in there. So why go to all the effort of buying her all these nice clothes if they were just going to leave them? Of course, Tanya doesn't know the plan at all, so she's like, "No, I just want to stay here. I don't want to go anywhere." And then they up the level of the window shade there to sort of end the argument. It's a little bit of byplay back and forth. And of course, he gives her a love pat on the behind, but she plays right back by biting on his tie. Again, it's little tiny moments that make these scenes breathe and have an element of real life to them. And even though the music's beautiful, Bond is shown buckling the holster on. Again, going back out into the world. We're still in the realm of Spycraft. And here, Bond gives her the wedding ring, which completes the cover. And she has a beautiful reaction to it because, again, she loves the idea of posing as the married couple. It's a lovely little flourish. We get this nice little moment that is immediately pulled back down and ripped into reality because now Bond is being confronted by the conductor. And there's been a terrible accident. You see Sean's face immediately fall. He gets Tanya to go back in because he knows something's up, and now he's going to be confronted with Kerim's death. And again, you have other real passengers. They have to wait for them to move around. And the reveal here is beautiful. The door is opened. We don't see anything but the actors' faces. And we only see Kerim and Benz's bodies once Sean moves in. And if you notice, obviously Grant has staged this whole thing to make it look like they killed each other. So he killed them both, maybe by strangling them, and then stabbed them and staged the bodies just right to make it look as if they killed each other. Bond has one last moment of affection and then takes his cigarette holder. It's a personal memento, of course. You can see the deep feeling that he had for the man laying there on the ground. Of course, he doesn't get his wallet, which he gives to Kerim's son later. It's something I've always wondered about. Now, there's Kerim's son, who was the chauffeur that we saw earlier, and this is where they were going to originally jump off the train. That's why he has the confused look on his face. Now, here when the train pulls away, the shot there of the man standing there with the sort of cane, it's been a fan theory for some time that maybe that's Ian Fleming making a cameo, but it doesn't really look like him. Plus, it looks like the man has black hair. Now, here Bond is going to confront Tanya because, obviously she knows more than she's letting on. This is a very delicate scene. Bond has to know what's going on, and he's angry, and he's just lost his best friend. And he's reading every reaction she has, and he wants the facade to stop, and he's also very angry. So he grabs her. And, some people read, oh, well, he grabs her and he slaps her and, oh, he's too rough on her. But there's a lot at stake here, and time is precious, and it's, if it weren't for this, all this stuff going on, and Kerim's death just happening, and all the stakes have risen even further, and the fact that Bond knows that she knows more. And if you notice here, he backs off. He's like, okay, I've gone too far, and he backs off, and he's like, maybe they didn't let you in on all of it, but what you do know, tell me. And she can't break through her own fear of who she thinks is Smersh. And then Bond just leaves it with, she says, I love you. And he says, sure. Closes the door, so now there's a distance between them. So that is a remarkably well-handled scene that I think most people don't read into enough, because I've seen it referenced before where people will be like, oh, well, he's too rough on her. But it's not the same level of cold callousness that you see Bond interact with some of the female characters in the Guy Hamilton films, which I think there's a difference there. Now the train's stopping, and Bond will be able to meet with one of Kerim's other sons, who will be able to pass messages to MI6. Now this is a moment that is right out of a Hitchcock thriller, but done so beautifully, with Grant stalking Bond exactly in the manner that he did with the Bond doppelganger in the pre-title sequence. And he passes through the windows and stops. And then right there when Sean stops, you see his face perfectly reflected. So he's watching Bond and hiding between the windows so he's not seen. But you see his face perfectly framed. And of course, now he's able to see him give the recognition code, so he knows that this man is obviously an MI6 operative. And of course, Bond quickly tells him about the news of Kerim's death, because he has to remain very cold and callous about his job, because there's still a job to do. And then he immediately goes into the information he has to pass. He needs help. So, get him to send me somebody to help in Zagreb. And, gets it all out. It's like, all right. And then he starts to move off. Only then does he stop. And on the personal side, leave the mementos of his father. He gives him his wallet and his cigarette holder and his watch as well. And then when you get to see the son look at it, obviously have memories of his father, who is so larger than life. And then we see Grant. So Grant has heard the whole exchange. So now we know that Grant knows that there's going to be an extra man in Zagreb, which is why he then will get off the train and ambush the man. Now we have another montage. Like, we got a short montage before of the train travel. Peter Hunt said he hated montages. He hated doing this sequence, so he just banged it together in frustration, and it works beautifully well. We get the passage of time. We get the train travel. We're getting further and further away from Istanbul, closer to the border. The pressure cooker of the film is increasing, and again, the level of suspense is building. And then Zagreb, if you look, there's a little tiny light coming through the map to sort of highlight it. And then I've always loved the shot here of the train windows starting to come to a stop, and it finally comes to a stop, perfectly framing the station sign of Zagreb. I've always loved that moment. And then who is first to get off the train but Grant himself? And the way he's dressed and the way he carries himself is very much like a studied version of Bond, like what Spectre says Bond is like and what Grant has been trained to act like, but devoid of all emotion. Now, here we know this is Captain Nash because he has the attaché case. Funnily enough, he's played by Bill Hill, who was one of the location men on the production team. I think apparently they had an actor scheduled and he just didn't show up, or they needed somebody. And he said it was always funny. It's like, what were we supposed to talk about? Oh, Grant comes up and says, oh, yes, I'm James Bond. Oh, nice to meet you. How about we go have a pee? Because they go off and go into the restroom. But we know exactly what's going to happen because, of course, Grant puts on his trademark death leather gloves. It's also amazing how fast that he kills him, because he goes in and then comes out just a few moments later. So it shows you how proficient Grant is at killing people. Of course, we don't get the backstory of Grant in the novel, where he is, a complete psychopath. But, we can totally understand that he's a psychopath just from the performance alone. And the nice touch of he takes the gloves off and puts on the hat, makes sure to carry the case where Bond can clearly see it, catches Bond's eye, turns around very slowly, approaches him warily. Now, they give the recognition code, but Peter Hunt brilliantly removes it and allows the train steam to build up. So our suspense is heightened to the absolute maximum, because we're like, oh my God, but he won't know the code. And then, no, he knew the code. He's broken through. Now we first hear him, and he's put on an accent. Of course, we've never heard him talk at this point, except for here. And he's so committed to this role of this sort of stage Englishman. So he's put on all, not just accent, but all these airs. And again, he keeps the hat on. But Bond is still wary. And again, his sixth sense is telling him that there's something strange about this guy. And so there's a bit of this in the novel, in Bond's internal monologue, where, he chalks it up to him being from a different background and having to be in Turkey for a bunch of years, where it's a different culture and things like that. You get that in the film, but you can still see that Bond is picking up, his antennae, as it were, or picking up that something is not quite right with this fellow. I've always loved the wood paneling in the train set, just how much of the red-orange just comes out. It adds a certain character to the train car set. And again, the silence, the way their eyes are studying each other, it's the performance in between the lines between Sean and Robert Shaw that really highlight the fact that they're already sparring with another, and you can see in Sean's eyes that Bond doesn't fully trust this man. And again, you can tell that Grant has been prepared and has studied for this exact moment, because he can't slip up at all. He has to pass himself off as a British operative. And this is that sets up this whole scene where Bond sends Nash and Tanya ahead to the restaurant car, and you get that great moment where Grant stares back at Bond because he knows he's up to something. And then Bond goes over and actually locks the door so they can't barge in on him. And he's going to go and search Nash's case to see what it is. He sees, of course, it's the MI6 attaché case, clothes, and then there's a PPK in there. So obviously he has the bat, he has the case, he has the correct pistol and everything. And so that sort of allays his suspicions for the moment. But Grant is now suspicious because Bond's been gone for a little bit, so he gets up and goes out, and then bumps into Bond and has to brush it off. And you notice Bond has brought the Lektor with him because, of course, he's not going to leave it in the train car. I always thought it was really funny, the whole MacGuffin of the film, Bond just sits down next to the table, and what happens if some poor waiter comes along and trips over it? Of course, by this point, after Bond confronting Tanya, she's just completely distance and doesn't even bother ordering anything. And of course, Grant orders the same thing and can't decide anything for himself like Bond does, except for the wine, where he makes the complete wrong choice. And you notice Bond glances over when he orders the Chianti, which is the red wine with fish, because that is the improper way of doing things. So you notice already, Bond notices that too. That's another mark against Nash, but he's like, oh, well, he's not concerned with those things. Now, Grant will be able to drug Tanya's wine. And the great moment is Bond totally knows what he's doing, and he watches him drug it. So if you notice, Bond continues eating. He watches him put the chlorohydrate capsule in there, watches it fizz and everything. But Bond starts eating again, and he looks at the glass, and he looks up. He looks over at Nash. So he knows he's drugged Tanya, but he doesn't say anything. So he's like, okay, this man's obviously up to something. He's going to drug her, but okay, I'm going to let him play his game. And then the uncomfortable toast where Nash is obviously forcing Tanya to drink, and Bond goes along with it. Now it's starting to take its effect, and she's starting to pass out. So again, Bond is letting Nash hang himself, as it were. And I love the bit where Nash is playing Grant as Nash is playing the English gentleman. Ladies come of a faint. Exhaustion, I'd say. Bond turns out the lights and closes the door, once again closing Tanya off from the world. And of course, he says the stuff you put in a drink. Pulls the PPK, turns around. Take it easy, 007. My escape route's only for one. Stares at him like cold steel. And then Nash says, you after what are you after? The girl with the Lektor. So Bond, against his better judgment, is like, all right, what's your plan? And Grant's having to find a way to get the drop on him, so he pulls the map out. And he's actually explaining his real escape route, which is how Bond knows it later on, by picking, where the truck's going to be and then where to drive to get the speedboat. And then the wonderful sly move where he pulls out the ankle pistol and uses it to knock Bond temporarily unconscious. And all Bond's suspicions were, of course, correct. And here, the noise of the train is foleyed up. So this is silent, there's no score, but the train itself, the noise comes up in the mix, so that adds to the suspense. We see Grant pull the gun, disarm Bond, but of course he also takes his wallet and all of his cash because, of course, Grant is a greedy bastard too. And he pulls the cigarette case. That is key. The cigarette case is how Bond deflects Grant's bullet in the novel. They pass into a tunnel, and the bullet hits the cigarette case, and Bond is able to get the drop on Grant, and there's a tiny fight, and then the scene's over. But by pulling that, anyone who read the novel is like, oh my god, it's gone. How's he going to survive this? There's no way, there's no Deus Ex Machina for him to get out of it. And as soon as Bond gets up, Grant drops the accent, and for the first time you hear his real voice, flat, without emotion. And just even the way he holds his eyes is totally laser focused and machine-like. And he's automatic. He's not even moving in the same way. He's stock still, and he's, back to being himself. And here Bond thinks that, okay, well, this is the executioner of Smurfs, which, of course, he is in the novel. And Grant doesn't even say anything but Smurfs with a sort of implied question mark. And Bond immediately puts it together and realizes that it's Spectre. And you see in Sean's head the wheels are turning, and Bond is able to put everything together and realize that they've been played for saps, both the British and the Russians. And then realize, oh, well, then Spectre killed everybody. And then it's like, you? And then Grant just, And here you get to see Grant have this vivid gleam. As he says, he gets a great kick out of watching the great James Bond, watch out, see what a bloody fool he's made of himself. That he already knew the recognition code. And of course, he was Bond's guardian angel the whole time. Because, of course, otherwise, Bond couldn't deliver them the Lektor on a silver plate. And Bond still tries to maintain his humor, his composure, and he's putting everything together in his head and realizing, he's been completely played by Kronstein's plan. And he gets the full impact of it here, where Grant talks about the film taken in the bridal suite and the planted letters. So it's going to set up the great torrid love affair that will get put all over the world press and completely humiliate both the British and Russian spy services. So that is the final coup de grace, the final jab of Kronstein's plan, which unfortunately I think most people sort of miss out on. It's bad enough, but that makes it a whole torrid public affair that will further tarnish both countries' espionage services. And, humiliate Bond before killing him, too. And the question, of course, becomes, how in the hell does Bond get out of this? There is no way out. There's no way Grant's going to let him go. There's no way that Bond can bribe him. He even tries a half-hearted attempt, and that doesn't work. He even tries, the offer, he tries for a cigarette, not a chance, And Grant wants to kill him. He's a complete psychopath. He's waited for this moment. He's been drooling over it. And the wicked gleam that he talks about, when the story gets out in the papers. And when Bond pushes Grant, he provokes a reaction. Grant walks over, slaps him across the face in the key lines of the scene. My orders are to kill you and deliver the Lektor. How I do it's my business. It'll be slow and painful. Here Bond tries bribery. He sees it sticks a little bit, but Grant throws it off. Your word of honor as an English gentleman, always with this mocking tone. And then finally, they look down at the gun. The first one won't kill you. Not the second. Not even the third. Not till you crawl over here and you kiss my foot. And from that moment on, you know that James Bond is literally toast. And it's his own fault. But he keeps trying anyway, and it doesn't work. And you can see that he's getting more and more tense. And finally, when he says he'll pay for it, that's what causes Grant to break, because Grant has taken all of Bond's money. And it's Grant's greed for the 50 gold sovereigns that sets up everything. And Bond has eliminated every other option by this point, and this was the only thing that sticks. And now the case has come into play. So now everybody in the audience is like, oh, but then he gives it to Bond, because it's Bond's suitcase. So apparently the idea, Grant thinks that Bond has planted a weapon in Nash's case. If you notice, Bond turns the case away so Grant can't see him open the tumblers properly. And Grant's putting the gloves on, so you know this is it. Bond freezes because he's playing along with the idea that he's hidden a weapon in Nash's case. He spins it around again, and now Grant is going to open it himself because he knows that there's probably a planted weapon in there, because Bond has played him to think that. Now we go. Train has been dialed down, and now everyone is literally sitting on the edge of their seat. We don't see the clasp at first. The first one opens. Now we go in close. Now the second. Now there's a pause. Now the tear gas goes off. And now starts what is unquestionably, I think, the greatest screen fight in cinema history, where Bond and Grant completely demolish this tiny train compartment and fight so hard that their faces become blood red and sweaty and their clothes get ripped, and it is absolutely brutal. And the best part is the camera gets right in there, and it's the actors themselves almost 100%. There aren't cutaways, there aren't a bunch of stand-ins, and it is brutal. And I love that they even bring the doors of the train compartment in. And then the sound effects, especially when he crashes Grant the third time, it makes that really loud sound. And the train noise comes in because they break the window and shoot out the lights immediately. And then this moment here, there's a little Peter Hunt jump there where Bond puts his hands up to ward off Grant's blows. The great shot here where he's trying to bend his neck backwards, puts his hand across, and then does the chops at the neck. Now, Terrence Young worked all of this out with various stuntmen and figured out where they could put the cameras and everything, spent hours doing it on an off day, and then got together with Sean and Robert Shaw to really get them in there. And now the garrote wire watch has come in, paying off the first appearance in the pre-titles. And Bond will struggle and manage to finally retrieve the dagger, which he then stabs Grant in the arm. It's not a fatal blow. So just like in the novel, Bond stabs Grant, but then is able to kill him with his own garrote watch and a nice comeuppance. And again, just you can see how visceral this was. Bond is exhausted. Both his and Grant's faces were blood red. He's got blood on his hand. And then the way to cap the scene off, Bond retrieves the film and the letters after this brutal fight. And then the last thing he does, after retrieving the case and the Lektor and every other item, he goes back and grabs the wad of money. You won't be needing this, old man. And the old man is that last jab, at Grant's usage of that term. And that's the way that we undercut the severe tension of that astonishing fight sequence, which, again, I don't think will ever be equaled in the cinema, because that is what the entire film has built up to. So, in a lot of ways, the best single sequence in the entire James Bond series is in the second film, and is the entire Orient Express confrontation. The confrontation, Bond is on his knees staring into his own gun, and then the fight with Red Grant. Now they must escape and use the way that Grant had set up with Spectre. Bond calls it Nash's escape route, and he actually takes the time to get Tanya off the train. Most people probably would have just left her there drugged. Now he knows for sure that she's a complete innocent and manages to save her. This moment is really key. Of course, this was shot day for night, so it is stopped down a bit. But the way that Sean moves around, Saltzman and Broccoli love to talk about how he moved very cat-like, and I think you see it here most in any of the films. I love how he goes over, bent over, and jumps up on the train to ride it down some. Also love this is one of the few sequences where he keeps the fedora on, which is something that gets lost of the early films. And you see here where he crouches on the ground with his hands and then goes right into the train and prowls around the side of the truck. I mean, he literally does move like a cat, and you see it here more than I think any other sequence. And he slowly moves backward. And it's also a nice mirroring of the earlier scene with the abandoned jumping off the train. Here's one of the best moments of humor in the film, where Bond smashes the guy's hands painfully under the truck hood. Excuse me. Again, there's something badass about Bond creeping around in a fedora, I have to admit. I think it's such a shame that because men's hats went out of fashion that it became part of Bond's wardrobe that just got lost pretty quickly. And then we get the nice shot of the train moving off slowly. Also something very workmanlike about Bond having to drag the unconscious man, put him in the truck, and then go and grab Tanya and put her in the back. Nice working in of something similar to the Dr. No line, don't run away. And then the fun bit is, of course, I guess for cover, the truck is filled with flowers in the back. So Bond puts Tanya back there, and it's literally like a bed of roses. So I guess that had to be intentional, but it's a fun little thing and a really nice visual too. And that seems kind of a nice breather, but now we're building back up, and Bond literally says, "Come on, wake up." And the music is a nice Bond theme blare. And now we get to the two major action sequences for the film that were devised because the novel merely cuts from the train to the finale with Club in the hotel room. So these two sequences, the helicopter and the speedboats, were designed to give the film more action beats to close out on, because otherwise, we would immediately go to the end and it would be kind of anticlimactic. So a lot of people like to point to the helicopter scene as being a direct lift from Hitchcock's North by Northwest from 1959, with the absolutely famous, iconic crop duster sequence where Cary Grant's Roger Thornhill is menaced by a diving crop dusting plane. Now, while that's perfectly obvious that was the inspiration, there's no cutaways here and there's no process shots. So the key difference here is, it's Spectre agents. They're using machine guns. They're dropping grenades. First, Bond is driving, trying to get away, and then finally decides he's going to use himself as bait, and that's when he gets out of the car. Because they're obviously, they say try and straddle the truck. They're not trying to stop him, kill him, because they have to get the Lektor back, which is the same thing with the speedboats later, and Bond realizes this. So that's why, if you look, he grabs the Lektor and takes it with him. And he still is protective towards Tanya. He gets her to climb under the truck so she can be out of the, machine gun fire. Now, Bond runs off, and this is where we deviate from North by Northwest, because Sean runs around some, but this is Bob Simmons jumping away from a helicopter for real. There are no cutaways. There are no process shots, and it gets ridiculously close, especially the shots from inside the helicopter where you see Bob jump down. I mean, it's just... he could have easily been killed, there's nothing but sheer talent, and it's interspersed perfectly with moments of Sean running around, obviously out of harm's way, but I mean, that's those moments, those are for real. There's a nice matching movement there where Bond runs past the camera. We immediately cut to the helicopter going past the camera, and then as it has to come back around slowly, we get this great moment of Sean coming from up behind the rock, almost documentary style for a second. He runs past the camera to then get underneath the stone outcropping here. Now he's got the AR-7 rifle. He gets it put together in like half a nanosecond. Now here, when he shoots the arm, we get a cue from Dr. No, which is used in the final explosion of Crab Key. It's one of two moments in the finale that are lifted from the Dr. No score. And you have to wonder why that happened. I guess maybe it was late in the game, so but you would think Barry would have a cue, so maybe there just wasn't anything, or Peter Hunt liked that particular Dr. No cue because it'll pop up again in the speedboats. It's also really cool. Bond's fedora is immediately off, so now he looks super cool with the perfectly parted hair. Of course, that was a model helicopter, but we have a nice life-size one on location. If you look there, you can see Sean's hair blew away, so you can see sort of under the toupee, and now the hair's back to being perfect, and that's obviously a process shot. But Bond looking perfectly cool, with the one-liner, one of their aircraft is missing. One of the great, iconic, frameable Bond moments there as he's cradling Tanya from the blast. I always thought it was a nice humorous touch. He's already got the sea captain's hat on as he's going to get on the speedboat, and he keeps it on for the rest of the sequence. So that's a nice bit of a nice touch I've always loved. Same thing with this. He threatens the tied up associate with the gun under his neck. Like, where's the key? So this leads into the second sequence with the speedboats. Again, none of this is in the original novel, and had the film stuck to that, we would have literally cut to the finale in the hotel, which, again, would just feel a bit anticlimactic. So these scenes do form an important... they serve an important purpose. It's also fun. Bond could have easily killed the man, and probably should have, but just tosses him off into the water because, just isn't your day, is it? A lovely Barry cue that, again, finds the right balance between romance, adventure, and humor. And now they're headed for Venice. And obviously, they think the coast is clear because they're using the Spectre way out. Now, she finds charts down there and also says, there's a very pistol and some flares, which sets up Bond using them later on. So it's a nice setup of that as well, because you're like, okay, well, now there's that, and there's all these oil drums. So this is all being set up for how this sequence is going to play out. And they have a nice open sea ahead of them. Now we cut back to Spectre for the first time since the opening of the film, and Blofeld reveals the bodies were found on the train. One of them was Grant. And this sets up a nice bit of suspense where one of them is going to be punished with the proper Spectre way of punishment for if you do anything, you're going to get killed. So why people join Spectre exactly, I don't quite know, because their turnover rate has to be quite exceptionally high. So the suspense is drawn out here because we have a nice bit of misdirection. As a nice added touch, we have Morenzi from Spectre Island come back, being the one with the poisoned shoe. Of course, he's played by Walter Gotell, who would famously come back in the Bond films, playing General Gogol, starting in The Spy Who Loved Me. And, of course, using the poisoned shoe sets up the poisoned shoe for the finale, because if without this sequence, the poisoned shoe would not make sense. It would just be a dagger. And, of course, it is coated in a very highly toxic poison. And it is set up to further the suspense as if Klebb herself is going to be killed. And then a slight change to the aim. And I love the way that Vladek Shobal, the actor who plays Kronstein, does this. And his face is so sweaty, but the way his eyes stare a hole through, Blofeld there. And then he collapses down. Before he even passes over the desk, Blofeld's 12 seconds. One day we must invent a faster working venom. The way Lottie Linya as Klebb shows fear by she's going to wipe her face, as most Spectre people do once they see a death, and then number 3, she jerks the arm back down. Another nice touch here where Tanya licks her finger and tries to find the wind. They're having fun, Bond and Tanya here. They think the coast is clear, and they're taking the shortest route, and it's still a nice open landscape. So they're relaxing for a moment, but as has happened throughout this film, it's immediately going to get yanked down because the enemy Spectre boat, the first of them, breaks into view. Bond immediately knows something's up and guns away. And that's confirmed when they say, "Ahoy, Mr. Bond." And again, we see Morenzi, so you know for a fact that it's Spectre because it's Morenzi from Spectre Island. It also shows he got from Blofeld's boat quite quickly to here. Now, originally they were going to shoot this, I believe, in Scotland, but they had a lot of trouble with the weather, so they wound up shooting this elsewhere. And there was a really hairy incident where Tara Chung and a cameraman had trouble in a helicopter. They were taking off to do some camera setups and stuff, and it actually crashed and sank under the water, and they both they managed to barely survive, and then Young quickly came back to the set and they kept going. The fact that they're using rifle grenades also adds to the danger and the tension, because these guys are serious, But it's also funny that as Morenzi quickly starts to point out, they're firing too close. You're trying to sink them, you're trying to stop them, not sink them. It's a bit I've always loved. It's like they get so overzealous, they're gonna completely sink them. They're gonna blow up the boat, and then right now the machine gunner will hit the oil barrels, so that way they don't have reserve fuel. And it's a nice bit because now Bond realizes they have to do something, and he lets off the oil barrels, and you're like, okay, well, as Tanya points out, the boat is now lighter, we can go faster, but he stops, and Morenzi sees the barrels and decides to slow down the boats because he knows, he must be giving up. So again, this notion of Bond outthinking everyone else, Bond being the supreme intelligence man, is so hugely important to the early films and Bond's character. It's a great cut there from the splash of the oil barrel to hands up, Mr. Bond. And he cuts her off by muttering, hand me that very pistol. So the very pistol comes into play. And then here we have the iconic blowing of the barrels. Beautifully composed, and a much larger explosion than probably what would have happened with just those few barrels. Again, here's the Dr. No music cue coming back, the same one inserted here. This looks really dangerous because that's a real explosion, and I know several of the stuntmen definitely got some burns there. So I think this was done on a tank at Pinewood. But you can see all the smoke and everything. I mean, these are legitimately real flames and explosions. Not a fun place to find yourself. It's amazing how effective the Dr. No music is when Peter Hunt cuts it. So it still fits in for Mush with Love, even though it's kind of weird having two moments that are from Dr. No. So it's Monty Norman music instead of John Barry music. So that is the second of the action sequences, and now we've made it to Venice. So once again, we think everything's over. Bond and Tanya are relaxing in this lovely hotel room, enjoying each other's company. And it's like everything has ended, the adventure's over. And this sets up what eventually became a sort of tradition in the Bond films of having the final tag ending with the villain. There is a bit of this in Fleming's novels, but here we have Klebb come in disguised as the hotel maid. This is from the end of the novel. It's sort of a postscript. In a lot of ways, you could argue this is maybe the main genesis of the current trend of having post-credit endings. We get a nice tantalizing glimpse of the Lektor being open there. It's the first and only time we see what the Lektor decoder looks like, but it's just a quick glimpse. And because we've seen that, that's the Lektor, and she gets her hands on it, so she's going to take it away and then has to keep up with this dumb charade of being the old hotel maid. And Bond is completely oblivious because, again, we all think it's over, and this adds to the suspense. And Tanya freezes when she sees what's going on and has to figure out what to do. Because, of course, she's still terrified of Klebb, but she thought everything was over and they were home free. But, of course, they're not home free. Klebb uses Bond being on the phone with his back to her as the way to get the drop on him with the gun. And immediately Bond, again, being the supreme intelligence man that he is, knows exactly who she is and puts two and two together. And once again, as he is on the Orient Express, he's at the mercy of a loaded gun pointed directly at him, and he has no way out. And he's kicking himself because, he's dead. He's essentially dead. There's no way out. And again, everything goes silent, which adds to the suspense. Tanya goes out. They have last furtive glances at each other. And of course, what saves Bond is his connection to Tanya. Had he left her on the train, he would be dead. Had he not developed a human relationship with this girl, he would be dead. So there was a good reason for them falling in some sort of relationship with one another. And again, it's drawn out to the last moment. She almost gets the door completely closed and is going to blow 007 away. And then Tanya comes back in. Bond immediately jumps into action, and now we get the poisoned shoe. Bond immediately grabs a chair, and it's sort of like a lion tamer's act. And again, she gets so close to him, she could literally get the shoe blade into him. She kicks up so far, and that again heightens that tension because one little scratch from that will, wipe anybody out. And it's fitting that Tanya is the one who puts Kleb to rest. And I love that she still has that last little cry as she's sliding down. Her mouth stays open, and then she collapses out of camera range. It's one last moment of suspense and tension and danger that will close out the film. So this creates, this will pop up in the next film, Goldfinger, and it becomes a tradition of sorts. And we undercut that tension with one last line. Yeah, she's had her kicks. Immediately, hard cut to the beautiful shot of the pigeons flying away. And now we have the Matt Monro sung title song played over the end credits. Get the beauty shots of Bond and Tanya going down the canals. Of course, this is all rear projection. A nice touch of her returning the ring in case you ever need it again. Nice close to the romance. And then we get a nice reference to the Bridal Suite film. And that reminds Bond. And now he pulls out the film, and there's a jump cut here because what he does is he references what Grant says earlier, which is also cut out, where he says, "What a performance." That's why the quality jumps here, and that footage has never been found. That was removed. When Grant talks about the film, he says, "What a performance." That was cut. Bond mirrors that. Now, apparently this is not Sean's hand. I don't know if it's Terrence Young's or somebody's, but this little throwing away the film is such a beautiful gesture, and then waving away. It's one of my favorite moments in the series. And then we get the end title card. It's basically a reprise of the Dr. No ending, keeping the idea of ending a Bond film with a tryst on the water. I do love that it says the end, but not quite the end of James Bond, setting up the notion that will later be set with the famous words, James Bond will return. So we're left with a beautiful ending in Venice, a last bit of danger and suspense, and ends the epic cocktail mixture of energy, suspense, danger, spycraft, and romance that is From Russia with Love. The perfect realization of Ian Fleming's original novel, beautifully reconstructed for the screen by Richard Maybaum and the other writers, and fully realized by Terrence Young and the rest of the astonishing assembled original crew members of the James Bond series. So I think From Russia with Love remains the single most strong and most effective film of the original series, and is without a doubt one of the greatest films ever made. And it's just something that is an astonishing film to return to time and time again, and will always remain so. So with that being said, that is my commentary on From Russia with Love. I hope this has been informative, rewarding in some way, and that it wasn't just me babbling on for about 2 hours. So once again, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, humbly yours, I am the Motion Picture Analyst.